I had always believed that family was a sanctuary, a place where love outweighed greed, where loyalty was more important than wealth. But that illusion shattered the day they came to me with their plan. My own blood, smiling like angels, but carrying knives in their pockets. It began innocently enough. The rich widow, Madame Hasina, had lost her husband recently, leaving behind a fortune that could make anyone's eyes glitter. My relatives, who had always envied my modest independence, suddenly became concerned about my future. At first, I laughed nervously, thinking they were joking. Why settle for a small life? My uncle had said, draping an arm around my shoulder, when you could marry her, think of the wealth, the influence, the comfort. Surely you'd want that. I stared at him, the room suddenly feeling smaller, suffocating. I had grown up hearing about wealth, yes, but never at the cost of one's dignity or happiness. And this wasn't a proposal. It was a demand. You mean, you want me to marry a woman who already has a husband's place in her heart gone, and be just another man among others? I asked, my voice trembling between disbelief and rage. My aunt smiled, a predatory curl of the lips. It's not about love, child. It's about opportunity. She is rich. She can support you. You could live like a king. And besides, what do you know about love anyway? The words struck me like a slap. I felt my stomach twist, my chest tightening. They were not just asking me to marry a widow for money. They were asking me to compromise my soul, to accept polygamy, to surrender my sense of self, to hand over my life to greed, and for what? Their gain. Not mine. I could feel my parents' portraits staring down at me from the wall, as if they themselves were questioning my silence. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and sorrow. How had it come to this? How had the people I trusted most, the ones who were supposed to love me unconditionally, turned into mercenaries for wealth? No, I said finally, my voice firm now, cutting through the room's heavy air. I will not. I will never marry her, not for money, not for pressure, not for any of you. A brief silence followed, then laughter, sharp, bitter, incredulous. You're foolish. My cousin sneered. You're throwing away a fortune. Think carefully, or you'll regret it forever. I met their gaze evenly, refusing to bow. I had expected anger, perhaps even tears, but I was ready. The only thing I regret, I said, is ever thinking that my family valued me more than their greed. They left the room, muttering and glaring, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. Their betrayal stung, yes, but it also lit a fire within me. If they wanted me to bow, to bend, to surrender my integrity for their benefit, I would show them that I could rise without them. I would take back my life, piece by piece, and one day, they would see the cost of their arrogance. As I sat alone in the quiet house that evening, I realized something important. Betrayal had a taste, bitter and harsh, but it also sharpened resolve. I wouldn't let their greed define my destiny, and one day, when the tables turned, I would not just walk away. I would make sure they felt the weight of their own folly. Because they had forgotten one thing, I was not someone to be forced, bought, or broken. After their betrayal, the house felt colder than ever. The voices of my relatives echoed in my mind, greedy, mocking, convinced I was weak, but I wasn't weak. I had felt the sting of their betrayal, and now that sting had become fuel. I realized something crucial. They thought I was defenseless, that their wealth and influence could bend me. They were wrong. For days I moved quietly like a shadow in my own home. Outwardly, I played the part they expected, polite, conflicted, even considering their advice with a hesitant nod. But behind that mask, I was observing, remembering, and plotting. Every whisper, every sly comment, every greedy glance they threw around the widow's fortune was being catalogued. I was taking mental notes of their lies, their manipulations, their selfishness. The first step was patience. I couldn't afford to act hastily. Revenge required precision. If I moved too soon, their greed would shield them. So I started small. I documented conversations, recorded sly suggestions, and even collected proof of secret deals they tried to hide. Every time they tried to pressure me, I smiled politely and nodded, while secretly logging their words like a meticulous historian chronicling their own downfall. Meanwhile, I reached out to people they had overlooked, friends, neighbors, even distant relatives who had quietly suffered under their manipulation. I realized I wasn't alone. People had witnessed their deceit, their hunger for wealth, and their willingness to betray even family for comfort. Together, we began forming a silent alliance, small but strong. I shared my plans carefully, testing trust, building loyalty, and ensuring that when the moment came, I would not act alone. The widow, Madame Hasina, remained blissfully unaware of the chaos my relatives were stirring. I made sure she never knew my thoughts, never suspected that I was quietly resisting. To her, I remained a polite, respectful figure, someone who could easily be swayed if she chose. It was important she underestimated me. That way, when the truth came out, it would hit harder. Every day, I found satisfaction in the small victories. A lie exposed here, a manipulation thwarted there, a greedy cousin embarrassed in front of an associate without knowing why. It felt sweet, like tasting honey after months of hunger. And yet, the sweetest part wasn't humiliation or embarrassment. It was the sense of control, the knowledge that I was no longer a victim. I had reclaimed my dignity, quietly and deliberately, but it wasn't just about them. It was also about me. I began to feel my own strength, my own independence, and my own worth. I realized that no amount of money could buy respect, loyalty, or love, and that I had all of those already, if only I trusted myself. My family's betrayal had been a brutal awakening, but it had also been a gift. It had shown me the people I could rely on, the ones worth my energy, and the ones who would eventually reap the consequences of their own greed. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: evidence, allies, patience, and clarity. My relatives still thought they held the upper hand, still believed they could manipulate me. Little did they know I was ready to turn the tables, to transform their laughter into regret, and to show them the price of underestimating someone who refuses to be broken. For the first time in days, I smiled freely, unburdened by fear. The taste of resistance was intoxicating, and it fueled a single, burning thought. When the moment came, my revenge would not only be sweet, it would be unforgettable. The day finally arrived. Every step I had taken, every whispered plan, every quiet observation led to this moment. My relatives had no idea that their schemes, their manipulations, their obsession with wealth would be used against them. They still thought I was the same hesitant, obedient person from days before. How little they knew. The first move was subtle but devastating. During a family gathering where the widow, Madame Hasina, had come to meet us all, I allowed my relatives to flaunt their ambitions. They spoke freely, boasting about how they had guided me toward the marriage for her fortune. Every word, every smug smile, every condescending remark was carefully recorded, not in the air, but in the evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past weeks. Then, when the time was right, I began my work. I spoke quietly at first, asking simple, pointed questions that drew attention to their contradictions. "Oh, cousin, didn't you just say yesterday that I would have no choice but to marry her?" I asked innocently, turning my head toward the widow. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Yet today you mention that she must decide herself." Their laughter faltered. My uncle's face flushed crimson. My aunt's hand trembled as she reached for a napkin. Every guest felt the shift, a subtle electricity in the room, as my relatives realized they had underestimated me. But I didn't stop there. I had prepared a small presentation, something subtle but undeniable, a compilation of their conversations, their schemes, and their admissions of greed. One by one, I played clips of them boasting about their plans to profit from my marriage, to manipulate me, to bend me to their will. The room fell into stunned silence. Madame Hasina's expression shifted from curiosity to shock, then to respect. Even she could see the audacity and the betrayal. What is this? My cousin stammered, turning pale. We didn't mean, no, I interrupted gently but firmly. You meant every word, every attempt to force me into something I would never consent to, every plan to make my life a transaction. I meant to show everyone exactly who you are. The humiliation was exquisite. My relatives tried to recover, to justify themselves, but no explanation could erase the truth. Their arrogance, their greed, their willingness to sacrifice morality for money was laid bare for everyone to see. Guests whispered, the widow looked on with a mixture of horror and admiration, and my relatives' carefully maintained facade crumbled like fragile glass under the weight of their own corruption. And then came the final blow. I calmly informed Madame Hasina of their plans, showing her the evidence, letting her see how they had tried to manipulate me for their gain. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a surge of vindication, not in cruelty, but in justice. She smiled softly, a rare warmth in her gaze, and whispered, "You have more dignity than they ever had." As for my relatives, I didn't just leave them exposed. I cut them off. Financially, socially, emotionally, they were left scrambling. Their schemes had failed spectacularly, and now they faced the consequences of their own greed. I didn't gloat. I simply stepped away, calm, confident, untouchable. I had not only defended myself, but shown the world that integrity cannot be bought, and that betrayal always carries a price. That night, as I returned to my quiet home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The taste of revenge was not bitter, it was sweet like sunlight after a storm. They had tried to force me into a life I would never choose, but instead, they had handed me the ultimate victory, the knowledge that I had not only survived their betrayal, but had risen above it. And somewhere in the echo of their embarrassment, I could almost hear it, the hollow laughter of those who once sought to control me, now empty, now powerless. The house that had once felt suffocating now felt like a sanctuary of clarity. The echoes of greed, lies, and betrayal had faded, replaced by silence that was no longer heavy. It was liberating. I had faced the storm, outsmarted those who sought to control me, and emerged unbroken. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. The aftermath of the confrontation had been swift and merciless. My relatives, stripped of their manipulative power, retreated into the lives they had almost destroyed with their greed. Social circles that once hung on their every word now questioned their integrity. Some whispered behind closed doors, others openly shunned them. It was not vengeance I sought, it was justice, and justice, when patient and precise, had a sweetness all its own. Madame Hasina, the widow who had been the catalyst for their schemes, reached out to me in quiet respect. She did not offer riches, nor did she demand gratitude. Instead, she simply acknowledged the strength I had shown. "You have chosen dignity over convenience," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of admiration. "Most would have bent under pressure. You stood firm." Her words warmed me, but it was not her approval I sought. It was the affirmation of my own choices. In the days that followed, I returned to my simple life, the one they had tried to manipulate for their gain. I found joy in small things, the laughter of friends who had supported me quietly, the freedom of walking streets without expectation, the peace of knowing that I was fully, unapologetically myself. The money, the status, The wealth that had once seemed alluring now felt meaningless. I had discovered something far more valuable: independence, integrity, and self-respect. Occasionally, I would hear of my relatives' struggles, business deals collapsing, alliances breaking, whispers of isolation, and a quiet satisfaction would rise in my chest, not out of cruelty, but as a reminder that choices have consequences, and that the seeds we plant often bear fruit in ways we cannot control. They had chosen greed over love, manipulation over morality, and now they were learning the cost. I often sat by my window in the evenings, watching the sun dip behind distant rooftops, and reflected on the journey. Betrayal had hurt, yes, but it had also taught me resilience. It had shown me the people worth keeping close, the values worth defending, and the strength hidden within myself. In resisting their pressure, I had found a deeper freedom than wealth could ever offer: freedom of spirit. My home, humble though it was, became a sanctuary of peace and authenticity. Friends who had once felt sidelined by my family's influence now visited freely, sharing laughter, meals, and quiet conversations. We celebrated honesty, loyalty, and the warmth of connections that could not be bought. And in those moments, I realized that the greatest revenge is not in destruction, but in living fully, proudly, and without compromise. Sometimes, when the wind carried faint echoes of my relatives' misfortune, I would smile. They had tried to force me into submission, to rob me of dignity, to make me a pawn in their greed. But I had outwitted them. I had reclaimed my life, preserved my values, and shown that courage and integrity carry a weight no fortune can match. And as night fell, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost nothing worth keeping, gained everything worth having, and learned that life, when lived on your own terms, is the sweetest triumph of all. Because they had forgotten one truth: a soul that refuses to be bought cannot be broken, and a heart that chooses dignity over wealth will always find its victory.